What you're witnessing right now on trading floors across three nations is something that veteran market analysts are calling unprecedented in nearly 5 decades of modern economic history. Red signals are flashing everywhere, bleeding across every single sector on the boards, and manufacturing futures have plummeted a staggering 9.3% in just 11 minutes of absolute chaos. Here's the thing that nobody in Washington wants you to understand right now. The Canadian dollar didn't collapse the way Trump confidently predicted it would during his campaign rallies. Instead, it actually climbed upward by 1.2% because the sharpest traders on the planet recognized something the administration refuses to acknowledge publicly. Mark Carney just walked straight out of that room after calling their entire bluff. And now, 420,000 American jobs are dangling precariously by a thread that's already beginning to unravel before our eyes. But here's what nobody is telling you about what really transpired behind those closed doors. And trust me, the real story starts when you understand exactly why Carney made this calculated decision to storm out of negotiations. Before we dive deeper into the chaos that just erupted in that secure conference room, make sure you smash that subscribe button and leave us a comment below sharing your honest opinion. Do you believe Carney made the correct strategic move by walking out on Trump? Or is this confrontation going to devastate working families on both sides of the border? Your engagement and participation is exactly what keeps this independent analysis alive and completely free from corporate influence and filtered narratives. 47 minutes ago, something extraordinary happened. Inside a heavily secured conference room located 3 floors beneath the West Wing, the single most consequential trade negotiation in North American history completely fell apart in under 8 minutes. We know the precise timeline with absolute certainty because 3 separate sources, 2 officials, from the Canadian delegation and 1 insider from the US Trade Representative's office, have now independently confirmed the exact sequence of events as they unfolded. President Trump entered that room 14 minutes behind schedule. No apology offered, no explanation given whatsoever. He was flanked on both sides by Peter Navarro and Robert Lighthizer, the identical negotiation team that attempted and ultimately failed to intimidate Mexico during the contentious 2019 trade discussions. Trump didn't take a seat at the table. He remained standing at the head of the table, reached into his jacket, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it deliberately across the polished surface toward Prime Minister Mark Carney. Have you ever watched someone receive news so absurd that their face betrays nothing but quiet disbelief? That's exactly what happened next. The document bore the official title, Executive Tariff Framework Revision Proposal. But make no mistake about the true nature of this document. It wasn't any kind of legitimate proposal. It was functionally a ransom note dressed in bureaucratic language. The demands were deceptively simple, yet impossibly destructive. Trump demanded that Canada accept a crushing 34% blanket tariff on every single steel, aluminum, and auto parts export flowing into the United States, unless Canada immediately agreed to 3 specific conditions. The first condition demanded that Canada completely dismantle its dairy supply management system within a 90-day window. The second condition required Canada to immediately ban all Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers from utilizing Canadian factories as a backdoor entry point into the American market. But it was the third condition that shattered any remaining possibility of productive dialogue. Trump demanded that Canada pay a so-called border security fee amounting to $2,400 for every single commercial truck crossing into the United States, with all funds directed toward what he called the Northern Wall Initiative. Carney examined that document for perhaps 30 seconds. He never touched it. He never picked it up from the table. Sources present in that room describe how he simply stared at the paper as though someone had handed him a restaurant menu, scrolled in crayon by a child. And then, Mark Carney did something that no Canadian Prime Minister has ever done in the entire history of face-to-face meetings with a sitting American president. He rose from his chair, methodically buttoned his suit jacket, locked eyes directly with Trump, and delivered words that will echo through diplomatic history. Mr. President, we traveled here in good faith to engage in discussions about genuine partnership. What you've presented us with instead is nothing short of extortion. Canada does not negotiate under threats, and we absolutely do not pay protection money. This meeting is concluded. And with that declaration, Mark Carney turned and walked directly out of the room. He didn't pause to wait for any response. He didn't offer Trump any opportunity to save face. He simply departed. His entire delegation followed him out in disciplined, single-file formation. There were no handshakes exchanged, no diplomatic goodbyes uttered, just the harsh sound of chairs scraping against the floor, and that door closing with a soft click that might as well have been a gunshot reverberating through the halls of power. The American delegation sat there in stunned silence. According to our source inside that room, Trump eventually turned toward Lighthizer with visible confusion and demanded, "What the hell just happened? He can't do that. Get him back in here immediately." But Carney was already seated in his motorcade vehicle, speeding toward the Canadian embassy with his team. Within just 19 minutes of that dramatic walkout, Carney's office released an official statement. It was only 4 sentences long, but those 4 sentences detonated like a tactical nuclear warhead across every trading floor from Wall Street to Bay Street. The statement read, "The Government of Canada entered today's discussions fully prepared to negotiate in genuine partnership. We were instead presented with demands fundamentally inconsistent with the sovereign interests of Canadian citizens. Effective immediately, Canada is initiating a comprehensive review of all cross-border trade dependencies, with particular focus on critical energy exports and rare earth mineral supply chains. We remain open to respectful dialogue when the United States is ready to engage as an ally rather than an adversary." That phrase, critical energy, exports, just put 11 American states on immediate notice that their electrical power grids might experience what economists call a managed interruption. Let me translate that bureaucratic language into terms that will hit your wallet directly. Carney isn't threatening to flip some dramatic switch and plunge American cities into darkness. He's threatening something far more sophisticated and far more painful. He's strategically going to slow down the flow of resources, deliberately create uncertainty in markets, inject massive risk premiums into every energy futures contract, and let the market mechanisms do the punishment for him. Let me show you the actual receipts, because this isn't speculation. This is game theory playing out in real time with your heating bill as the stakes. Receipt number 1 concerns the critical infrastructure choke point. Right now, Canada supplies a staggering 61% of all crude oil that flows into the Great Lakes region. That Canadian oil feeds essential refineries in Toledo, Detroit, and Chicago. Those refineries produce the gasoline that powers everyday life across Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Indiana. If Canada decides to review those export licenses, citing national security reasons, those refineries won't shut down overnight. But they will start operating at significantly reduced capacity within 3 weeks. When refineries run below optimal capacity, the cost per gallon doesn't increase by pennies. It skyrockets by whole dollars. We're projecting $780 per gallon by late March. If this confrontation continues, receipt number 2 reveals the devastating employment cascade. The tariff Trump is threatening sits at 34% on auto parts. On the surface, it sounds like punishment directed at Canada. But here's the reality his advisors apparently don't understand. A single automobile assembled in the United States crosses the Canadian border an average of 7 separate times during production. A transmission casing manufactured in Ohio gets shipped to Ontario for machining, comes back to Michigan for assembly, goes to Canada for electronic integration, and returns for final installation. If you slap a 34% tariff on each crossing, the effective cost increase on a finished vehicle isn't 34%. It reaches 238%. Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis have all run these numbers. We've obtained their internal memos. If this tariff goes into effect, they will shut down production lines in Dearborn, Lordstown, and Spring Hill within 6 weeks. That's not 420,000 jobs theoretically at risk. That's 420,000 jobs with termination notices already being drafted in human resources departments across the Midwest. Receipt number 3 exposes the political mathematics. Of those 420,000 jobs about to vanish, 316,000 are located in states Trump won in 2024 by margins of less than 3%. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio. These are the swing states that delivered Trump the White House. These are communities where union workers believed him when he promised to bring manufacturing back. And now he's about to obliterate those jobs because he couldn't handle a Canadian Prime Minister who refused to bow down. The United Auto Workers hasn't issued any statement yet. Their silence is absolutely deafening. Typically, when Trump announces trade protection measures, the UAW cheers loudly. Check their Twitter feed right now. Nothing. Because union leadership understands that Carney just flipped the script. Carney forced Trump to choose between his ego and his voters. Trump chose ego. Receipt number 4 proves the market knows who holds leverage. Within 40 minutes of that statement, S&P 500 futures dropped 1.7%, Dow futures plummeted 2.1%. But Canadian TSX futures only declined 0.4%. Why such a dramatic difference? Because sophisticated investors understand fundamental asymmetry. Canada sells essential commodities. America sells consumer goods. When trade war erupts between a commodity exporter and a consumer economy, the commodity exporter always wins short term because people need heat and gasoline more than they need new iPhones. Trump's entire negotiation playbook is based on scripts written in the 1980s, when America was the only consumer market that mattered. The formula was simple. Threaten to close market access, wait for panic, accept minor concessions, declare victory. But that playbook assumes the other side needs you more than you need them. Canada isn't that country. Canada doesn't sell cheap electronics you can source from Vietnam. Canada doesn't sell clothing you can buy from Bangladesh. Canada sells the fundamental inputs your civilization runs on: energy, water, minerals, timber. Things you cannot replace because there is no alternative supplier at that scale and proximity. When Trump walked into that room, he thought he was negotiating with a subordinate. He thought he was dealing with Justin Trudeau 2.0, someone he could steamroll with volume and vulgarity. But Mark Carney isn't a career politician. He's a former central banker who ran 2 major economies through crisis. He stabilized Britain during Brexit. He managed Canada through 2008 without a single bank failure. Carney doesn't think in poll numbers and approval ratings. He thinks in leverage ratios, risk premiums, and structural dependencies. When Trump slid that paper across the table, Carney didn't see an insult. He saw opportunity. He saw a chance to recalibrate the entire North American power dynamic in a single move. Notice what Carney deliberately didn't do. He didn't yell. He didn't call Trump names. He didn't appeal to shared history. He simply left because Carney understands that Trump's superpower is chaos. Trump thrives when people engage emotionally because emotion clouds judgment. By walking out, Carney refused to play the game. He made Trump the one chasing, Trump the one looking weak. Trump the one explaining to Michigan workers why their plant is closing. Carney's strategy is what military theorists call strategic patience. Trump needs a win today because his news cycle is measured in hours. Carney is playing for the quarter, for the fiscal year by threatening energy review. Carney put every Republican senator from border states on phones, screaming at the White House to back down. He outsourced the pressure. He made Trump's own party do his negotiating. This is the first time in modern history that a Canadian leader has looked at the United States and declared, "We don't need you more than you need us, and we're willing to prove it." For 80 years, Canadian foreign policy was built on keeping America happy, compromise when necessary, smile through insults, accept the smaller peace, because challenging the United States was national suicide. Mark Carney just set that assumption on fire and walked out while it burned. The Carney doctrine emerging from Ottawa is simple. We will trade with you. We will cooperate with you, but we will not be subordinate to you. If you treat us as a partner, we'll act like a partner. If you treat us as a colony, we'll remind you we're a G7 economy with resources you can't live without. Now, let's discuss what this means for you personally. Whether you're in Michigan or Alberta or California, this isn't just a trade dispute between politicians and expensive suits. This is the potential unraveling of the most integrated economic zone in human history. For over a century, the US-Canada border was functionally invisible for commerce. Trucks flowed freely. Parts moved seamlessly. Supply chains ignored the boundary. That border is about to become very visible again. If this standoff continues, here's what unfolds in 60 days. Auto plants across Detroit, Toledo, and Oshawa announced temporary shutdowns. Temporary becomes permanent by summer. The 420,000 jobs at immediate risk are just the first wave. Every manufacturing job lost creates ripple effects. The diner across from the plant loses customers. Real estate softens. Tax base shrinks. Schools cut programs. Economic models suggest for every direct manufacturing job lost, another 2.3 service sector jobs disappear within 18 months. You're not looking at 420,000 jobs. You're looking at 1.4 million jobs gone by the 2026 midterms. Energy costs in northern states spike dramatically. Heating bills double. Gasoline hits $8 per gallon in Wisconsin. Inflation roars back because energy costs touch everything. Food prices rise, clothing prices rise. Everything gets more expensive while wages stagnate. But the deeper damage is to American credibility. If the United States can't maintain functional trade relationships with Canada, the friendliest neighbor it has, how can anyone trust American commitments? How can South Korea believe the US will defend them if America is picking fights with Ottawa? How can Europe rely on NATO if the president threatens to kneecap Canadian economy over dairy tariffs? Trump is systematically destroying American power, not through military defeat, but through incompetence and ego. Every ally is watching and making contingency plans. Every adversary is taking notes. The message is clear. America is unreliable. America is erratic. America cannot be trusted. The tragedy is this was completely avoidable. There was a deal on the table. Canada was willing to make concessions on dairy. They were willing to tighten EV rules. They were willing to increase border security funding. All Trump had to do was negotiate like an adult. But he couldn't help himself. He had to walk in with the ultimatum. He had to be the strong man. He had to humiliate the other side. And now he's the one humiliated because Mark Carney called his bluff and walked away. Yesterday, reporters caught Carney leaving the Canadian embassy. A Fox News correspondent shouted, "Prime Minister, are you worried Trump will follow through on tariffs and crash the Canadian economy?" Carney stopped, turned, adjusted his tie, and responded, The Canadian economy is built on resources the world needs. The American economy is built on consumers who need those resources. You do the math. Then he drove away. Canada isn't scared. Canada is daring Trump to push the button because Canada knows when the bomb detonates, American workers get hurt most. So where does this go? We're at a fork, and both paths lead somewhere ugly. Scenario A represents the corporate coup. Every major corporation with Canadian exposure is on phones with Republican leadership right now. Chamber of Commerce, Auto Alliance, American Petroleum Institute. They're telling McConnell, telling Johnson, telling every GOP senator that if tariffs happen, economic collapse hands Congress to Democrats in November. Pressure builds until Trump sends Lighthizer back, with face-saving compromise. Tariffs never happen. Crisis fades, but damage is done. Every ally knows America threatens nuclear options over minor disputes. Scenario B represents the death spiral. Trump's ego won't let him back down. He signs tariff orders. Carney responds with environmental reviews on all energy infrastructure. Reviews take 18 months. Energy flow slows to trickle. Prices explode. Inflation hits 8%. Fed raises rates. Markets crash. Recession by September. Midterms become bloodbath. Democrats take everything. Scenario C represents permanent realignment. Carney decides America under Trump is fundamentally unreliable. Canada diversifies away from American dependence. New frameworks with Europe. Energy negotiations with Asia. Flights to Beijing, Brussels, Tokyo, coalition building against American unpredictability. 20 years from now, Canadian oil flows west to Asia. Goods flow east to Europe. And America stares at empty borders, wondering how they lost their closest ally. Right now, we're heading toward Scenario A, but every hour Trump stays silent pushes us closer to Scenario B. The longer he waits to back down, the harder it becomes without looking weak. And Trump would rather destroy the economy than look weak. This is the test. Can American institutions stop a president from committing economic suicide? Can Republicans stand up to Trump? Can corporate America force retreat? Or do we watch in real time as the most powerful country in history torches its most important alliance because one man couldn't handle being told no? I want to hear from you. Do you think Carney made the right call walking out? Do you think Trump will back down? If you're one of those 420,000 workers whose job is on the line, what do you want your leaders to do? Drop your answers in the comments. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because when this breaks, and it's going to break soon, you'll want to know immediately what it means for your paycheck, your gas bill, and your future. This is history happening in real